Welcome back. It's baby making time where sperm plus that ovum equals 3. Even though he may ejaculate 200, 300, 400, up to 500 million sperm, it takes exactly 1 to get her pregnant. Okay. That oocyte viable for up to 24 hours, usually sperm 5 days. So there's that overlap in fertility. Now, once the sperm has fertilized that ovum, you now have what we call a zygote. And it's not necessarily the fastest swimmer, the Michael Phelps of the sperm, that becomes the baby daddy. And you'll see why as I talk through the process. I really love this scanning electron micrograph picture because it shows the sperm and it shows how long the tails are in relationship to the nucleus. But then it shows the ovum, the oocyte that was ovulated with its surrounding some of the granulosa cells of the corona radiata. And so it really puts into perspective the size of the cell of the sperm versus the size of the cell of granulosa cells versus a huge size of the cell of that secondary oocyte with all the food and nutrition, because this oocyte, this ovum that gets fertilized, this is responsible for all the nutritional and physiological needs of that developing zygote for weeks. Okay, like, yeah, until there is, a circulation, until there is placenta, until there's some other way to bring it up. And that's why the mom, the secondary oocyte, is bringing like the refrigerator and the cooler and the backpack and everything else, because she knows it's going to be a long haul. So here's how the fertilization process normally happens. So up here you can see an oocyte, and you can tell it's a secondary oocyte because it's got a little polar body over there. And the zona pellucida is this yellow part, and then these other cells on the surface are the corona radiata. And here are all the little sperm. So even though it shows, you may think this is one sperm, it can be, these are multiple sperms. So what has to happen is a sperm has to get to the corona radiata, okay? And so it's got to get through the corona radiata, and then it gets up to the zona pellucida and realize, brick wall, can't get through. I need a little dynamite. And so the acrosome releases its enzymes. And so when the acrosome releases the enzyme, that causes some electrical changes, which lets a sperm penetrate the zona pellucida. Now, I may be the acrosome that is here, and I'm releasing my enzyme, and there on the other side of the oocyte, there just happens to be a sperm trying to get through right when I made it able. And that's the sperm that's going to be the baby daddy, not me. Okay. So this is showing it getting through the corona radiata, reaching, can't get through the zona pellucida, releases those lysosomal enzymes, can get through the zona pellucida, and now it is inside the zona pellucida and outside the oocyte, because the brown is the oocyte. What's going to happen then is the plasma membrane of the sperm around the nucleus is going to fuse with the plasma membrane of the oocyte, and the nucleus of the man gets dumped into the oocyte, cytoplasm. And the rest of the sperm is not needed, okay? This triggers meiosis II to finish. And so now you would have a second polar body. So at fertilization, the ovum after ovulation is stuck in metaphase 2 with a polar body off to the side, the red zona pellucida, and this is all the corona radiata granulosa cells. Okay. This lives 6 to 24 hours after ovulation. So this is occurring here. Ovulated, the fimbriae creating their currents, bringing it into the fallopian tube where we have cilia, as well as some peristalsis. And what happens is fertilization usually occurs here in the distal third, like closer to the fimbria side, not closer to the uterus side. So the oocyte doesn't have to travel very far. The sperm, which is self-propelled, has to travel a lot further, and some sperm are going to go up the other side instead of this side, and some sperm are going to get lost with long travel. They're going to stay at the inn overnight, and some sperm may even get out and get into the peritoneal cavity. All right. After fertilization occurs, then the zygote, the fertilized ovum, will continue pathway back towards the uterus, courtesy of movements in the fallopian tube, the cilia, and the peristalsis. Now, if that doesn't happen, and you go see a fertility doctor, well, there's lots of different methods. They could just put your oocytes in a petri dish and dump some sperm in there, and once again, it would be whichever one, random, whatever. Or if the sperm all have those short little tails that I showed you before, and they can't swim and they can't do anything, they can't get through, then they can do what is happening in this picture, which is they are actually injecting the male nucleus from the sperm into the oocyte itself of the lady, and thereby creating a baby. Now, we've had in vitro or test tube babies, whatever you want to call them. They're not in test tubes, obviously. They're in petri dishes, but you can call them test tube babies because they're frozen in test tubes. We've had these for enough years for test tube babies to have had children. And so with a good 10 to 15 years of data, we now know that most of those children inherit whatever fertility problems their parent had. So at some point in time, you may want to let your kids know if they were test tube babies, if they were courtesy of in vitro fertilization instead of the normal way of getting pregnant, because their fertility could be impaired, and it might be something that they want to look into, like before they get married or before they have relationships. Definitely don't tell them before high school, because then they'll think that they can't get pregnant and won't use birth control. But it is a conversation that you probably should let them know at some point. So after fertilization, whichever sperm was lucky enough to fertilize that secondary oocyte, that caused that ovum to finish meiosis, and now we are back to a diploid zygote, because we had the haploid sperm with the haploid secondary oocyte. So there's our secondary oocyte. There it is being fertilized. And so here's a picture of a fertilized oocyte, which is the white cell, and around it you can see the zona pellucida. And I have red arrows and blue arrows to show you a couple of things. And notice there's two of each arrow. The two red arrows are pointing to the two polar bodies, so that you know it has finished meiosis too. And the two blue arrows are pointing to the male and female pronuclei. So it's still one cell with two pronuclei that haven't fused together yet. This looks totally different than one cell that has divided into two cells, because here's what that looks like. This is a two-cell embryo that still has the protective zona pellucida and still has some corona radiata. And so it's these early embryos, 2 cells, 8, 16, 32. Those are the size embryos that are usually frozen for later implantation, because not all the embryos will take and grow into babies. So day 0, ovulation occurs. By the time fertilization happens, we're going to call that day 1. That's in the distal third of the fallopian tube. And development starts. We go from 1 cell to 2 cell to 4 to 8, 16, 32. We form this ball of tissue. And then by about 8 to 10 days after ovulation, implantation occurs, which means that the zygote actually goes into the proliferative endometrium. It's not sitting there on the surface because then it would just roll off and come out. So it actually embeds itself. And this often triggers some bleedings. And women will interpret this as having like, oh, I had a light period. It was like a day or two early, and it was very light, but it was a period, when in fact that was implantation. So after the zygote, while it is still in the fallopian tube, it's going to start proliferating in cells and start producing human chorionic gonadotropin, thereby giving the positive feedback to the corpus luteum for it to continue its progesterone and estrogen secretion. After implantation, about 2 weeks, right around the time your period is due, this is what your pregnancy looks like. Not look very babyish, does it? Yeah, it really doesn't. So realize when we are counting pregnancy, it's 40 weeks of pregnancy, but the first 2 weeks are the 2 weeks after ovulation before your period. Okay. So by the time you missed your period, you are now already 2 weeks pregnant. So by the time you're supposed to have your next period at 5 weeks, the developing human looks pretty much like a lot of mammals, looks a lot like a chicken at this stage, okay? You got a tail, you got this funky looking head with this funky looking eye and ear things, and you got little limb buds, okay? By 9 weeks, you're looking a lot more human, okay? And at 14 weeks, at the end of the first trimester, you're about 3 inches in size and weigh a little bit over 1 ounce. Continuing developing, at the end of the second trimester, you're somewhere between 10 and 12 inches long and you weigh a little bit over a pound. The eyes are still fused shut at this time. And at this point, we can, the organs have all developed. They're not all fully functioning, but we start having a significant percentage of these babies, if born in the correct center, and pediatric intensive care, we start having a pretty significant percentage of good outcome. I'm not talking 80%. I'm still talking under 50%. And then by 9 weeks, you look like a baby, you're 6 pounds, but you notice there's really no subcutaneous fat. That's what kind of develops in the last month of pregnancy. And in fact, in the last 2 weeks of pregnancy, that baby is putting on about a half a pound of weight a week. So if your doctor says at 36, 37 weeks, you know, baby's getting kind of big, I'm going to induce you at 38 weeks. 38 weeks is considered full term, although 40 is 40 weeks. It's because if you're 8 pounds at 38 weeks, you're going to be bigger than 9 pounds by 40 weeks. Okay. And that's it for this section. Only one more section. When we come back, we're going to learn about the mammary gland and its functions. Thanks.